Nearly 24 years after the movie Philadelphia, which focused on HIV/AIDS, Obba Babatundé is still taking on social issues that challenge us. In The Bold and the Beautiful, his character Julius Avants' transgender daughter is his former son, Myron. With Obba, we also discuss the African American imprint in Hollywood and Obbaisms.
4.5 decades of tremendous work. I think about your time, your role in Philadelphia. That movie was on the forefront of the AIDS epidemic in America and around the world. And here on the set of Bold and the Beautiful, once again, you're on the forefront of an issue that's galvanizing our country and the globe. And that's the transgender issue. You bring so much to those roles. What is that like?
Well, you know what? I've been blessed to be in these projects. You mentioned of Philadelphia, a movie, and this is also speaks to the power, the potential power of the industry. And I'll go into my definition of the entertainment industry in a moment. But the potential power, because the movie Philadelphia pointed up that we should deal with AIDS patients and victims relative to their humanity rather than defining them by their illness. We talk about Miss Evers Boys with a host of great people. Through that project, also fortunate enough to be nominated for an Emmy for that work as well. But I'm so proud of that because through that work, the President of the United States at that time, who was Bill Clinton, saw the movie and felt it necessary to come out and offer a formal apology from the country for this egregious wrong that had been done to these families. Offered them an apology to the survivors as well as reparations. Now you talk about Bold and the Beautiful and the concept dealing with the transgender issue. First marriage, as we understand transgender marriage to be ever done on television. And it's an interracial marriage. We're covering a lot of areas here. But what we've been able to do, which I think, and I'm proud of, is important, is that we've been able to take it just from an isolated transgender issue into the fact that it's a family issue. Because the decisions that we make affect us all. If you remember in the wedding scene, we learned a little bit about Julius's, and therefore his family's, pedigree. You know, when we don't look at things in a historical context, you don't see them in their accurate position, okay? Now, very often when we talk about blacks in history, we talk about slavery. I suggested to the people here at Bold and the Beautiful, and they agreed that let's not deal with slavery just because we're talking about blacks' history, let's talk about pedigree. Because even during slavery, there was a pedigree. So when we identify the pedigree of Julius Avant, his dad, who was his dad? And that this child, born male, named after the grandfather, changes his gender to a female. And this man of a different generation, concept, and time, perception of what life should be relative to his journey, which he passed on to my character, his son, and how he felt about my child changing their gender. And he felt so strongly about it that before his death, he gave me a severance check and disowned me. So we identify how our history plays a great part in the decisions and feelings of our future. We're getting a chance to expose that as well. So this is, we're talking about real life, much bigger than just cardboard characters. We have a great capability. Now, I use the word industry. Let me just elaborate for a brief second on that. Sure. The entertainment industry. Any word that has the word industry at the end of it is designed predominantly to do one thing: produce a product for a profit. So people often ask me, well, oh, how come the entertainment industry, you guys don't do more about da. And they're talking about moral issues. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you hold the car industry to a superior moral ethic? Or are you just concerned about the fact of whether or not Ford or Chevy or Mercedes makes a good vehicle? You don't hold them to superior moral ethic. What about the food and drug industry? Do you hold them to a superior moral ethic? If they're feeding you something which is not going to nourish your body, do you hold them to a superior moral ethic? No, you don't. So I'm not sure why it is you want to put that burden on the entertainment industry. Earlier I said your do is not necessarily your who. When I finish, take this wardrobe off, I'm Obba Babatundé, the man. My who is how I affect change in someone else's life. The bus driver, when they get off the bus, is she or he now just a bus driver? See, but when we see ourselves as a larger part of the picture of humanity, then I think that we avoid ourselves from segregating ourselves from ourselves or from our humanity.
Talk about the entertainment industry. We are seeing African Americans on television, in movies, on cable, on the internet. We're seeing faces that look like you and I 24 hours a day. What's your description? Are we living in the golden age of media from an African American perspective?
Well, again, great question. You know, I often say that, because people will come to me and say, hey, yo, bro, I'm gonna tell you honestly, Joe, I hear everything you're saying, but yo, bro, I'm just trying to get paid. To which I say there was full employment during slavery. There was full employment during slavery. Is it just about the fact that we're being seen? A golden age, that's an interesting terminology. What does that ultimately mean? Because it sort of seems that then that time will pass and we will be passé. We have been here since the beginning of time. We were not hatched during the civil rights movement or during slavery. We are a people of the human race, like everybody else. And so, yes, we are seeing more of us. But how are those images being presented? How are we being represented? I think that that's a question that bears answering.
We're listening.
That far be it from me to ever tell someone how they should earn their living. But a standard of excellence is, I think, is something that everybody should always strive for. Someone says, well, what does that mean? That you only play certain kind of characters? No. But what is the intent of the story that's being told? Because the images that we present go out around the world suggesting to someone who we may or may not be. Now, if the trajectory of the story is to glorify that which is us in our worst light, and that's all that is ever seen, no matter how beautifully we're dressed, no matter how gorgeous it's shot, if the intention, you have to identify that everyone's brain works the same way by association. So, you know, we talk about the fact that black men, you know, we often say that when we walk around, if we get on an elevator, that if there's a Caucasian female or male, that they tend to, you know, move in a certain way with an anticipation of a potential of something maybe happening. But guess what? That's not reserved just for those who are of the lighter hue. Because if the only thing that I've ever seen, or predominantly been seen, which is conditioning, brainwashing, if you will, suggesting that I am a dangerous individual, then everybody's going to function and operate that way. So now somebody coming from, let's take it away from the black issue. You know, I was on the phone many years ago. I was in Trinidad. And I was on the phone making a reservation for the hotel. And I was talking to a young lady, and she was taking the reservation. And she says, well, look, just when you get here, just ask for Jane. You know, and I'll make sure you have your room and everything will be fine. I said, great. So when I got there, at the desk was a woman who was Chinese. And I said, excuse me, I'm looking for Jane. She says, I'm Jane. Now, based on the accent, I had already made an assumption. And then I had also identified, whoa, regroup. You see, I had already somehow stereotyped potentially who she may or may not have been relative to her outward appearance based on the imagery that had been presented to me. The same thing happens in all cases.
What do you say to young African American actors and recording artists and entertainers who find themselves making gobs of money in some questionable roles, if you will? What do you say to them about humanity and character? And is this something that we want not only our people to see, but that the world sees it and that's how they think of African Americans?
Let me try and answer that question like this. There's a terminology that says, we just keeping it real. Yo, dog, you just gotta keep it real. And to them I ask, who defined real for you? I think that that's it. You know, you frame the question on the basis of the youth. And I understand why, because those that are coming into this situation and circumstances, hopefully having a longer career. But I'd like to addendumize that, if you allow me to. That I say it's not how long you've been living, but how long you've been paying attention. And that's why we have some young, brilliant people and some old fools. Not to disparage and saying all that are old are fools. Not to say that all that are young are brilliant. But it's not how long you've been paying attention. I mean, it's not how long you've been living, but how long you've been paying attention. And so I would recommend and suggest to them that please pay attention to exactly what it is that you're setting forward for your own future. Now, how do you say your own future? It's not just your own future, the individual. Because as I mentioned earlier about the pedigree, as I mentioned earlier about the legacy of how it is that we begin to identify who we are based on who we were.